You thought that facing your darkness would be enough to be free. But here's what no one tells you: the darkness doesn't vanish. When you see it, it begins to speak. There is a strange moment that comes after you've healed, after the tears have dried, after you've cut off toxic relationships, mastered the language of trauma, and can now fluently discuss nervous system regulation, anxious attachment, and inner child wounds like a pro. And yet one morning you look in the mirror and you no longer recognize who's staring back. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But what he didn't write in the textbooks is this: even when you've bravely faced your soul, you can still get lost in it. You've faced the shadow, the disowned part of yourself, but then you realize facing it is not the same as reconciling with it, and no one prepares you for the after. When the pain has settled and you expect light, but instead find a still, foggy place with no map, you start playing the role of someone who's woken up. You speak like a psychic-savvy person, set boundaries like a therapist, meditate like a monk. But inside you feel disconnected from life. You're not in pain anymore, but you don't touch joy either. You're not afraid, but you don't feel anything deeply. Just emptiness. And this is where most people get stuck. Not in the pain, but in the void after the pain. When life is no longer chaotic, but also no longer touches your heart. When you wake up each day no longer sobbing, but also no longer feeling truly alive. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, the place where the old ego has dissolved, but the true self hasn't yet taken shape. You've broken out of the old prison, but haven't built a new sanctuary. And so you begin to fear the emptiness more than you ever feared the pain. You start rebuilding your identity, but this time using spiritual language. I'm healing. I'm doing the inner work. I've overcome. But in truth, you're just dressing the same wound in a new mask. The shadow is no longer your enemy, but it's not yet your friend. You're not fighting it anymore, but you still keep your distance. If you've ever felt like you're living behind glass present, but not really here, knowing everything but feeling nothing, stay. Because this is where the real journey begins. Jung called it individuation, the journey back to wholeness. Not by getting rid of the shadow, but by embracing it as a sacred part of yourself. We will go where most people stop, beyond understanding, into integration. We'll explore why even the intelligent, sensitive, spiritually aware souls still feel lost, and how to stop trying to be perfect and start learning to be real. Are you ready not to find a shinier version of yourself, but to finally meet the part of you that was left behind when you first began to heal? Come deeper with me. In the next part, we'll decode why the shadow still quietly controls you even when you think you've overcome it. You thought seeing the shadow was enough, but Jung knew real transformation begins with integration. You once thought just seeing the darkness is enough, but Jung understood it's only when you enter it, stay long enough, and listen to the voice rising from within that something truly begins to change. We call it integration, but it's not a technique. It's not the final step in the healing cycle. It's a new way of living, a quiet yet profound transformation. It's where you no longer manage your wounds, but begin to walk with them. What's integration? Why is facing not enough? In Jungian psychology, the shadow isn't just negative traits like anger, selfishness, or jealousy. It includes anything you had to reject in order to be loved or accepted. Were you ever called too sensitive? You hid your tenderness. Were you constantly compared and told you weren't enough? You learned to wear a mask of perfection. Slowly, you packed away those unaccepted parts and buried them in your unconscious. That was how you survived. And one day you become conscious enough to turn back and face them. But what is facing? It's seeing, naming, recognizing. Integration is different. It's sitting with that part like it's a child who was abandoned and saying, I hear you. I won't leave you again. How integration actually happens. Imagine you're walking through a forest and suddenly come face to face with an old friend who once deeply hurt you. Your heart tightens. Your instinct is to run, but you choose to stay. You look them in the eyes and you speak your truth. That is a moment of integration. It doesn't happen in therapy sessions alone. It happens in real life between everyday choices. When you want to please someone so they won't abandon you, but this time you choose to stay true to yourself. When you catch yourself manipulating with silence and instead speak the fear behind it. When you don't try to fix uncomfortable feelings but stay with them without running away. The 4 stages of integration through Jung's soul work. Jung mapped 4 stages in the individuation journey, the path to becoming your true self. Recognition. You stop denying or justifying. You name the rejected part. I am jealous. I fear being abandoned. I feel insignificant. Acceptance. You pause and feel it without avoiding or repressing. You let the pain live in you. No fixing, no changing. Dialogue. You begin talking to that part. Like Jung did with figures in the Red Book, you can write letters to your fear, draw your anger. Meditate to meet your abandoned self. Embodiment. You don't just know about it. You live differently. You become someone who can love yourself even in your anger, jealousy, and insecurity. Symbolic integration. The myth of Psyche and Hades. Jung often used myth to reflect the psyche. One powerful image of integration is the story of Psyche and Hades. Psyche, the soul, is sent to the underworld to complete impossible tasks. One task: retrieve a vial of beauty oil from the goddess of death without opening it. But she can't resist the urge. She opens it and collapses. Jung explains this is the moment Psyche touches the deepest darkness, not intellectually but viscerally. Only then is the soul reborn. Integration is opening that vial. It's accepting that you can't heal without facing death, fear, and chaos. Signs of integration in daily life. You might already be integrating without knowing. When you stop explaining your anger and just say, I'm angry, and I want to stay connected with you. When you stop playing the nice one and say, I need space, I'm tired. When you don't rush to forgive because others expect it, but instead honor your anger as valid. In those moments, you're no longer controlled by the shadow. You're walking with it as a companion, not an enemy. The truth: integration is lonely sometimes because you sit with the parts no one else can see, but you're not alone. There's a community of people learning to live with their shadow, not just talk about it. People brave enough to be soft without shame, confused without pretending, lost but still moving. Leave a comment if you're on this journey too. Share. What part of you needs to be loved again? Even after integrating, the shadow returns. Not to test you, but to ask, are you still being true to yourself? In the next section, we'll explore the subtle signs of spiritual bypassing when healing tools become yet another mask, and how to tell what's real versus what's just learned. Are you ready to go deeper? Not just to understand yourself, but to live honestly with yourself. If you see yourself in these words, stay with us, because the shadow is not your enemy. It's the part of you most longing to be held. You were told facing your darkness would set you free. But Jung warned it, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. It's not the light that wakes you. It's the realization that light was born from your darkness. Facing it isn't enough. You must live with it. Sarah's story: when knowledge doesn't equal aliveness. Sarah, 29. An elementary school teacher in Chicago went through a powerful spiritual awakening. After losing her father, she started therapy. She studied shadow work, trauma, inner child healing. She devoured Eckhart Tolle, Gabor Mate, and Jung. She could name all her triggers. She could explain her anxiety through 4 schools of psychology. But one night, after a 30-minute meditation, she suddenly broke into tears, not because she was sad, but because she felt absolutely nothing. Not joy, not pain, just a hollow numbness. Jung called this the descent into the unconscious. You're no longer wounded, but you're also no longer alive. You enter the zone of psychic numbness, a soul shut down. This isn't the phase of facing, it's the invitation to begin integrating. So what is integration? Integration isn't better management of your darkness. It's not more awareness of your anger or loneliness. It's not the ability to explain your pain more eloquently. Integration means living with your darkness without judgment or rejection. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. You must welcome the parts you never wanted others to see, not to fix them, but to finally understand they are still you." The integration process via Jung and symbolic stages. Jung described the individuation journey as a symbolic cycle. Here's a simplified version. Step 1, recognize. You stop fighting the part of yourself you wanted to bury. You say, I feel jealous because I'm afraid I'm not enough. Step 2, feel. You sit with it. Like Sarah, who once tried to meditate away her feelings. Now she just sits and cries. No techniques, no analysis, only letting the emotion exist. Step 3, dialogue. You ask, what does this fear want from me? And you listen. Maybe it says, I just want to know I'm still lovable even when I'm not perfect. Jung called this active imagination, speaking to the unconscious like it's a living friend. Step 4, embodiment. You don't get over the anger, you simply stop being ashamed of it. You still fear abandonment, but now you stay in a relationship instead of running to protect your ego. Symbolic image. Psyche and the death jar. In Greek myth, Psyche the soul is sent to the underworld to retrieve a vial of oil from the goddess of death. She's warned, don't open it, but she does. Inside is a deadly sleep. She collapses. Jung saw this as a symbol pain that can't be understood by logic. You must die once in the unconscious so a new self can be born. Integration is opening that jar, not to win, but to finally admit you were never truly alive. Are you already integrating without realizing it? You understand psychology but still feel empty. You seem calmer but also colder. You can explain trauma, but you can't feel anymore. You may be in what Jung called shadow retrospective, looking at your shadow, but not yet walking with it. Sarah once said, I used to make sure I didn't inconvenience anyone. Now I'm learning how to need others. Without thinking, it makes me weak. That's integration, not perfect, but true. You don't need to be good at therapy or spiritually woke to belong here. You only need the courage to be real. Leave a comment if you've ever felt empty after healing. Say, I'm learning to live real. You'll see many others walk this same path. Even after integration, the shadow doesn't disappear. It returns, sometimes in subtler forms, wearing the mask of someone already healed. In the next part, we'll enter the most dangerous terrain of healing, where awareness itself becomes a form of hiding. Jung called it spiritual inflation, the ego hiding behind the mask of light. How do you tell if you're truly being authentic or just performing the role of healed? If this journey resonates, stay with us, because as Jung said, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. The trap of false enlightenment. When the ego wears a holy robe, there is a subtle paradox in the self-healing journey. The more we learn about psychology, the easier it becomes to fall into a deep inner deception. Carl Jung called this phenomenon inflation. When the ego identifies itself with contents of the unconscious, especially with the image of the self, instead of becoming humble before the vastness and complexity of the soul, we become prideful in the shadow of our own understanding. In answer to Job, Jung wrote, inflation is a regression to the archaic level, where the subject is identical with the object. This is a state in which the seeker no longer knows the boundary between themselves and the divine images they are pursuing. They cannot distinguish between true inner transformation and spiritual theatrics played out in the imagination. When the spiritual ego puts on the cloak of light, the person with an inflated ego doesn't realize they've simply replaced one mask with another, a more refined, solemn, yet equally disconnected mask. They use healing language to control emotions, use the philosophy of letting go to avoid facing their wounds, and use the word enlightenment to deny their own pain. Typical signs include frequently quoting spiritual authors, yet unable to live authentically in ordinary moments. Appearing calm but emotionally numb. Quick to judge others as not awakened to affirm their own awakened identity. No longer getting angry or crying, not because they've healed, but because they've mastered emotional suppression. When the shadow is deified. Jung once described a symbolic example of inflation in The Red Book. A dreamy character becomes a king, ascending a throne under the delusion that he is the chosen one, only to be devoured by the dream itself. That throne is the empty seat of the self. No one can sit upon it without being burned. Inflation is not merely arrogance. It is a subtle psychological process where the ego withdraws from reality and drowns in illusions of its own grandeur. We think we are living with purpose, but in fact we are performing a spiritual ritual to avoid pain. Comparison: one who integrates versus one who performs healing. The one who is genuinely integrating dares to acknowledge their pain and chooses to live with it. They not only name emotions, but feel them deeply with body and heart. In contrast, the one who performs healing only stops at labeling feelings without ever truly touching their emotional depths. In relationships, the integrator communicates sincerely, allows themselves to be vulnerable, and voices their needs even when it makes them feel weak. Meanwhile, the performer radiates positivity from a distance, always playing the role of the experienced one, strong, wise, but never revealing their true wounds. In practice, the integrator engages in meditation or journaling, not to escape feelings, but to confront and connect with them. The performer uses the same techniques, but with the goal of controlling or removing negative emotions to quickly return to a state of being okay. Their inner motives are also clearly different. The integrator acts out of curiosity, sincerity, and the willingness to live with paradox. They don't need everything to be perfect or clear. The performer, on the other hand, is driven by fear of losing control and the desire to maintain a good image, both in their own eyes and in the eyes of others. Those who are truly healing rarely say I'm healed. They're not afraid to admit they felt jealous yesterday or weak. They don't try to appear awakened. And that honesty is exactly what touches others' hearts. Spiritual bypassing, when light blinds you. One common form of spiritual bypassing is using mindfulness as a way to avoid. The practitioner meditates not to fully experience the present, but to get rid of suffering. The more they practice, the more frozen they become, like stone. But humans are not stone. We breathe, feel hurt, and love. Others will sense this when talking to you. You're there, but not truly present. You speak kindly, yet something prevents them from connecting with you. You're like a talking Buddha statue, beautiful but cold. Self-reflection. The shadow can wear white. Jung wrote in the Red Book, "The spirit of the depths taught me to say I am who I am, but the spirit of this time taught me you are what you achieve." The inflated ego is led by the spirit of the time's achievement credentials, the appearance of enlightenment, but the soul demands truth. Can you sit alone and cry? Can you say I'm jealous? I'm tired? I'm not ready? Here's a sincere invitation. Ask yourself tonight, am I dressing up my shadow? If yes, gently begin to undress it. And if you don't know how, let this community walk with you. If you're somewhere in the middle of the journey, not the person you were, but unsure of who you are, you're not alone. Share in the comments. When did you realize you were spiritually bypassing? And if you've moved past it, leave a piece of your story. We don't need perfection, just truth. In the next section, we'll explore how the shadow shows up in relationships, how it manipulates love, kindness, and even those we think are our soul connections. Sometimes the shadow doesn't scream, it whispers in the language of love. The final darkness of the journey and the transcendent function. There comes a moment in the inner journey when we are no longer fighting the darkness, but have not yet seen the light. A liminal state like the night before dawn when the soul no longer knows where it belongs. Carl Jung referred to this as the dark night of the soul, borrowing the term from St. John of the Cross, but reimagining it as a vivid psychological state, not just for monks or mystics, but for anyone brave enough to enter an honest dialogue with themselves. In the Red Book, Jung described this state as a spiritual desert where all familiar images dissolve and the ego is no longer the center of command. He wrote, "I must learn that the dregs of my thought, my spirit, and my feelings are my own inner chaos. It is within that breakdown that rebirth begins, not through strength, but through a full acceptance of our dual nature. You find yourself no longer suffering intensely, yet not feeling fully alive either. Everything is still eerily quiet. This is the phase where many give up. They think they've lost their way. But in truth, this is the threshold to a deeper level of integration, where the ego no longer drives the process but becomes the witness." Jung called this the transcendent function, a natural psychological mechanism that bridges two extremes, consciousness and the unconscious. It does not arise from logic, nor can it be forced. It emerges when we dare to hold tension between opposites without trying to resolve or suppress them. When we simultaneously accept fear, yet do not give up hope. When we feel our loneliness, yet still open to connection. Jung wrote, "It is a process of coming to terms with the unconscious in the form of a living dialogue and actual relationship." In mystical traditions, the dark night of the soul is often seen as the stripping away of all external supports and forcing the soul to walk through the spiritual desert alone. For Jung, this was not a punishment or failure, but a necessary condition for the old ego to dissolve and give way to a new form of being, where the ego no longer possesses the soul but becomes its vehicle. Imagine the symbol of Prometheus, the one who stole divine fire and was punished for daring to bring light to humanity. Similarly, when we enter our own darkness, we are also blaspheming against the old ego. It will resist, cling, make you feel guilty for no longer living by the old scripts. But it is through that very betrayal that consciousness begins to expand. At this point, many mistake the emptiness for regression. They think numbness means failure, but in truth, it is only the stillness before transformation. Like a snake shedding its skin, like a seed dissolving in the soil. Jung advised that instead of rushing back to old healing strategies, meditation, intellectualizing, and controlling We must learn to stay. Stay with the disorientation. Stay with the question, who am I without my old mask? In that moment, the transcendent function begins to activate, not as a logical answer, but as an intuitive image, a dream, a deep emotion rising for no apparent reason. It might be a childhood memory, a song that brings you to tears, a dream you can't explain. That is the voice of the soul, and if you are brave enough to listen, it will guide you to the next part of your journey. You do not need to solve the dark night of the soul. You only need to endure it and not abandon yourself. Are you in your own dark night of the soul? Do you dare to stop running and instead listen to what your unconscious is whispering? Share your experience in the comments, not to tell a story of healing, but so we can walk this path together. Each of us in our own darkness, but no longer alone. And if this speaks to something inside you, stay tuned for the next part, where we'll explore how darkness becomes light when we dare to engage it through vivid imagination, active imagination, Jung's most beloved tool. When staying with the emotion is a revolutionary act, there's a seemingly simple yet deeply unsettling question. Are you being true to yourself? Or are you unconsciously performing the role of someone who is healed? To perform doesn't mean you're being fake. It means you've simply grown used to controlling every emotion in order to survive. On the self-development journey, it's easy to mistake emotional understanding for emotional connection. You know you're triggered, you know it stems from childhood, but can you feel that pain? Jung called this disconnection between consciousness and emotion a loss of soul. He wrote, "We spend decades trying to become who we are, only to realize we were running away from our own sadness." Signs you're performing even without realizing it. You often use healing terms like trigger, shadow, inner child, but rarely cry from the heart. You're great at comforting others, but can't stand being alone too long. You create uplifting content, but feel inexplicably empty at night. You get uncomfortable when others are too negative because you haven't dared face the negativity within yourself. Pause and ask, when was the last time I truly felt pain without trying to fix it? If I didn't have to be okay today, then what am I? Staying with emotion is not surrender. It's the first step to real healing. Most of us were taught that negative emotions should be eliminated. The older we get, the more we try to manage them quickly. Deep breathing, exercise, journaling, watching healing videos. These can help, but if they're used to avoid feelings, they become spiritual bypassing. Jung called staying the beginning of alchemy, where the wound is not soothed or numbed, but held in its raw form. He wrote in the Red Book, "Emotion is not illness, it is the soul's language." Practice suggestions how not to perform. A. Notice the urge to fix your feelings when sadness arises instead of trying to change it. Observe the part of you that wants to fix it. Ask, why is this sadness unbearable to me? Who taught me that sadness is weakness? B. Choose to do nothing for 10 minutes. Sit in silence. No phone, no journaling, no analysis, no prayer. Just say to yourself, I will sit here with this emotion, whatever it is. C. Map your feelings like a terrain. Place a hand on your chest and ask, what do I feel here? Write down, I feel pain, fear, emptiness, numbness. Don't search for reasons. Just let it be seen. A message from the soul. No one is truly strong. At the core of each of us, there's a child still waiting to be held, not to be fixed, not to be healed instantly, just to hear someone say, I will not leave you. Jung never saw emotion as something to overcome. He believed emotion is the key to the self. Each time you sit with anger, sadness, or shame, you open a tiny door into your soul. And only when the soul is heard will you stop needing to perform the role of someone who's okay. Have you ever carried a feeling you were afraid to show? Have you ever smiled while hurting just to not burden others? Have you ever heard, be more positive and felt abandoned? If so, leave a comment. Share a moment when you weren't okay but tried to act like you were. Because when we dare to show our imperfection, that's when we're most real. And you're not alone. We've walked together from facing the shadow through spiritual bypassing the dark night, and now to the hardest act, staying with the emotion without controlling it. But the journey is not over. In the next and final part, we'll explore how to live a deep, soulful life, not by learning more, but by daring to fully live each moment with your soul. If this video feels like a calling, subscribe and leave a comment so we can continue the path, no longer chasing quick enlightenment, but returning slowly, one breath at a time together. Returning to yourself without rushing, without fear, without needing to be perfect. You've walked with me through a layered journey from facing the shadow, peeling away the mask of enlightenment, entering the dark night of the soul, and finally learning to stay with yourself without urgency. If you're still somewhere in between, not sure who you are yet, not truly okay, still afraid, still feeling empty, then I have something to say. You don't have to be healed to be loved. You don't have to fully understand yourself to keep going. You don't have to be awakened to belong in this community. As Jung once wrote in the Red Book, the soul demands your truth, not your perfection. This is not an ending, this is a beginning. From here on, you'll no longer seek salvation from outside. You'll learn to live with paradox, hurting, and open at once. You'll understand that light doesn't come from running from the dark, but from taking its hand and saying, let's keep walking. Each time you stay with your sorrow, instead of fixing it, you're calling your soul home. Each time you say, I'm not okay without shame, you break a generational chain of denial. Each time you look at someone without judgment, you're healing not just yourself, but the generations before you. A final invitation that is also a new beginning. Leave a comment. Where are you right now in your journey? Have you ever realized you were performing healing? What part of this video truly touched you? I read every word, and I believe someone else here needs to hear your voice, not perfect, but real. If this video felt like a mirror reflecting something true in you, click subscribe. Not because you need more information, but because you want a space to be more real each day. Because here we don't search for answers. We learn how to live with the questions. Thank you for walking with me this far. You are not alone. You have never been alone. And sometimes just knowing that is enough to begin again right where you are.